Hello, and welcome to Zoobean Experts on Air. Today I am very excited to be joined live by Jason Boog, the author of Born Reading, Bringing Up Bookworms in the Digital Age. And this is an issue and a topic that is obviously really near and dear to my heart as a mom and as a businesswoman. Very happy to have you here. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you. It's been so cool to find out more about Zoobean and meet you.
Yeah, likewise. I said to Jason over email when we met, virtually. And I'm like, God, I felt like reading the book, which is right here. So you should go get your copy. These are all the Post-its that Jason put in here when he sent me the copy of, like, see, this is like Zoobean and this is, and it was like I really felt like I was reading this. I felt like a true kinship with you. So welcome, and for anybody who is watching, we do have something called Q&A that is live right now. So if you want to ask a question, you can, and we'll be happy to answer those. Otherwise, let's get started. So Jason, give us a little sort of like the Cliff Notes version of your background and kind of leading up to writing Born Reading.
Yeah, I spent 5 years at Media Bistro writing the Galley Cat blog, which is all about publishing and books and authors, but for adults, helping aspiring writers find their footing in the publishing industry, things like that. So I was reading and writing about books every single day, but it was all for adults. It's some young adults, but mostly adult books. And then my daughter was born 4 years ago. And she showed up, and I had no idea what to do. I hadn't looked at a kid's book in many, many years. My wife received for her baby shower a small stack of kids' books, which was invaluable because I had nothing. And so I started reading those to my daughter at a very young age. From the first couple weeks she was alive, and I could see, even though people kind of look at you and you're crazy, I could see that there was some sort of a benefit there. And so I started saying, hey, I want to find out what's going on in her brain. So I just started interviewing people about it. And after a while of doing that and getting advice from people about how to read to my daughter, I said, there might be a book here, actually.
So sort of the impetus was your daughter, Olive, who is like I would call her the protagonist, if there is one, of the book. she's certainly... She sort of follow your experiences with her and sort of live through that throughout the book. So it was really Olive and that experience as sort of a parent, like realizing that what you know and what you don't know, that is that sort of what compelled you to write it is your own journey, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it was kind of like what my day-to-day job was. My job as a journalist was to say, hey, as an aspiring writer, what do I need to do? Who are the people I need to talk to? What are the resources I need to find? And I used that sort of investigative toolkit that I had to make myself a better parent. And it was such a cool process. And I'm so grateful that I was able to share that with all of you, because I became a better parent as well as someone who could write a book about this. So it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, like what were when you went in search of answers, where were some of the places that you went first? Like, what were some of the things where you expected to find information and didn't, or what was that like initial part of the journey like? What made you realize, God, there's a lot of gaps out here. There really are not other books like this out there,
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I did is I went to the Apple App Store, and that's where I had probably the most frustration. It's a swamp. I had no idea. I couldn't tell what was heads or tails, up or down, and it was really hard. And it wasn't until I actually tracked down some people who were doing research into the effects of reading on children, some developmental experts, and that kind of opened the door. They said, oh, you should be reading these people. There's actually 25 years worth of research about this, and you should be reading that. And so I went backwards with their guidance and found all of the foundational people. And the amazing thing was I got to speak to everyone I wanted to. So if they said, you should go speak to this expert who was writing about this 25 years ago, he wrote back to me, and we had a great conversation. And so I just went through this 25 years of research, and I was able to speak to everybody, and they were very helpful. They are all very dedicated and really believe in this and shared all sorts of great stuff.
One of the points you make in the book is that is that there is such a great body of research that is available and out there if you want to tap into it. And certainly as a journalist, a skilled journalist, you can go and, you know, sort of like cull through that information. That's your trade, so to speak. But you make the point that there's no real like playbook for parents, right? So that information's all out there. And if you want to find it piecemeal, there wasn't a place. But I think that's like a major premise of the book, right? Is like sort of taking that and putting it into one place that that can be at least a jumping off point for a parent to feel like you have the best of, you know, sort of research there.
Yeah, well, one thing that really blew my mind when I was writing it is we have had this information for 25 years, and it's not that difficult to learn it. I mean, the core techniques you can learn in maybe half an hour to an hour, and once you learn that, you will never read to a child the same way again. But I couldn't believe that no one was actually speaking to me in the hospital about this or saying, hey, these are some things that you can do when reading a book to your child, and it can have a measurable advantage for them. What one study said that you can raise a child's IQ by 6 points by just using these interactive reading methods that I talk about in the book, and that's a really amazing figure to me. And so yeah, I wanted to put it all in one place and make it very easy to learn it, and because I know how little time you have, and I actually when I give it to parents now, I just circle the chapter that has their child's age, and I say just read that one. Like, you don't need to read this whole book. Like,
sorry, you missed out.
I know you have no time.
Like it's only going to go up like 2 points because, you know, you missed out on years like 1 through 3. So tell us a little bit about like sort of the balance. I think that's one of the interesting points here. Is, you know, you might think from the title, like, you know, born reading. I think there's so many different schools of thought on like screen time and you know, educational apps. And like you said, I mean, this was a lot of the impetus for us starting Zoobean. It's the Wild West, especially with apps. There's no like publishing industry in the same way there's no vetting process, right? So it really is Wild West, but at the same time, it's not the same, like these you know, historic studies that we have about screen time when it comes to television aren't the same, right? You can make parallels, but you make these points which everybody's making now. It's like, well, you know, is co-watching or you know, interacting with an app really the same as like co-watching Sesame Street, right? There's so many, and you know, what are the benefits of each? You definitely strike, I think, like a balance, or like a everything in moderation tone in the book. What are some of your thoughts, and how have you addressed this with Olive, you know, in terms of like figuring out, you're a reader, you love books and print books, you also are, you know, not turning your back on technology, you're also embracing that, and embrace that at a young age with her, you know, when she was 2, and she was pretty young.
Yeah, well, I mean, I use technology every day as my job. I mean, every hour I am using technology of one sort, whether it's my smartphone or Google Hangouts to continue things. So it was such a big part of my life, and I wanted it to be part of my daughter's life too. And I think my wife actually pushed back on that more than I even did, and she said, you know, I don't really want to bring this technology into her life. So then I had to go do the research and find out. The American Academy of Pediatrics says, and this still stands right now, this recommendation that they say before 2 years old to minimize or have no screen time for your child before 2 years old, and then after that, no more than 2 hours a day of screen time for a child, and that counts any kind of device. And so we tried to stick to that, and we did it as much as you can. I mean, these devices are in our lives. I think it's impossible for my daughter to not know that it's sitting in my pocket, even when she was 2 years old.
Like shiny thing you have like hanging over in the corner.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's even before she could speak. I mean, you see your child reaching for it, and they will. It was a word she knew, one of the very first words she knew. So it was always a tough balance, but so once she turned 2, then I started to bring in devices, and we kept it much less than 2 hours a day. It was probably a half an hour of screen time every day, but that was enough. I mean, I would just study all night, find the best apps, bring them into our house, and then see how she reacted to them and which ones she liked. And it was awesome to have this tester. I mean, she was my partner in all of this, and she loved it. She loved exploring new apps and finding new things. And so if everything in this book comes olive approved too, and I think it's important to realize that. So that's kind of how the process worked. I mean, I would go to websites like Common Sense Media, the Fred Rogers Center, places like that actually recommend or create apps that parents can feel good about using, and I would bring those into our house and then have my daughter work on them and see what she thought.
And so talk to us from the perspective of your playbook, which is what you call it. What are some of the most important things for those early years for parents to keep in mind when we're interacting with our kids and sort of co-interacting with apps?
Yeah, I call it the Born Reading Playbook. It's 15 very easy things that parents can do to make the reading experience more interactive, and that's what 25 years of research has shown is the best way to read, the way that's going to be most enriching for your child. So I broke those down into 15 things that you can learn very easily. I even put it on a thing. You can cut out the pages, stick it on your refrigerator so you can remember. You don't use them all when reading a book, but they help when you're reading. So the main one, the very first one, is read together. Just make sure that you are sitting there reading or using the app with your child. That's where all the benefits happen, when it's a human being speaking to the child. There's a lot of apps out there that will read the books to your child or give your child a very interactive experience of them speaking to the book or listening to the book, but there's no human being involved. Those are great, and I'm not saying my daughter uses a lot of them, but just don't count that as your interactive reading time. Interactive reading is a parent reading to a child or using an app or a media experience. So that's the most important, is do it with your child. The second one is to ask lots and lots of questions. So when you're reading a book or flipping through the app, just at each step of the way, say, hey, how do you feel about that, about what just happened to the Berenstain Bears? Or would you play with that toy? Or what colors do you see on this page? Or if they really are young and can't even speak, I would do this with Olive. You'd say, where's something red on the page? And she could point to something red. And so through your whole life, just let your child know that when you read, you ask questions, and they can answer them. And if they have questions, they can ask you. Olive stops me now as much as I stop her to ask questions. It's something, once you model this behavior for them, they learn how to interrogate and ask questions while reading a book. So those would be the two most important keystones, I think, of the Born Reading Playbook.
In your experience, when you spoke with other parents, when you sort of talked to researchers, are most parents naturally doing that? Like, do we naturally do that, do you think? Or is the idea, because there's such an emphasis on, like, read aloud 15 minutes a day, make sure you're doing this to your child, that it's just read aloud, but there's even in, like, the recommendations, I think you have to be a very involved parent, just to be honest, when you think about what most parents going and reading with, the pediatrics, with the American Association of Pediatrics are writing, right? Are we going and, like, delving in deep? Certainly we are. We're in, like, the world of literacy, but they're not necessarily going and reading, like, each individual recommendation, which is what I love about the playbook, because it's not like 500 things, it's a few things. But did you find that most parents that you talked to felt like I've done enough, so to speak, if I'm just, like, reading aloud with my kid, and we've read together, and what are your...
That's a great question. No one's ever asked that. I wasn't, actually. When I was speaking to the people that created these techniques, I realized, I remember cringing while they were talking to me on the phone, and I was saying, I haven't been asking a lot of questions while reading. One thing I've always liked as a reader is dramatizing it, and that's one of the Born Reading Playbooks, is to make it, it's one of the techniques, just make it more exciting. Do the voices and do the sound effects. That helps your child process the story too, and it's very important. I always did that. That was very instinctual for me. But the idea of asking questions about it, that was a little new for me. But once I learned it, now it feels like I've been doing it my whole life. Like I just can't read a book to a kid anymore without asking them a few questions about it and getting their opinion and having them be involved in that. It really changes the way you read. And to your other question, the American Academy of Pediatrics, earlier this year, I was really excited. they said that they told doctors to start recommending to parents that parents read from infancy onward. Uh, so
Literally
doctors
born
are,
reading. It was
yeah,
good timing, right? It came
basically
out like
said
right
it. Yeah, and it was astounding. And I mean, the AP contacted me. I think they were surprised too because I mean, my book was coincidentally coming out at the exact moment that these recommendations did. So that was really exciting. So the doctors are saying yes, it's really important to read, and I want to stress that any kind of reading is great. I mean, any kind of reading is going to help your child, and the techniques I say are just things to augment it and make it stronger, and you can make it better. But the main thing is to read with your child.
I think what's great about the book, and that you make this point, is that it's like these very few small tweaks that you can make that really, I mean, I think of sometimes parents, you're tired, it's the end of the day, you like have to do the reading because that's what, but you kind of just like, especially as kids get older and they start asking questions every 2 seconds to prolong bedtime, right? It's like what, I think that what I love about this is that you just you say it's just like these very few small things that you can do, and then you can make this reading have much greater impact in terms of like your child's comprehension and all sorts of other benefits for just some minor tweaks, and honestly just adding on a minor bit of time, right? So it's not a huge lift, and I think that's what's very appealing about it for parents.
Oh yeah, and once you know them, I mean, they just kind of will surface while you're sitting there. I mean, I have a hard time even watching a TV show with my daughter anymore without saying, "Would you look at that?" or like, "Did you feel sad about what just happened to Arthur's friend?" or just kind of having a conversation about that. It really becomes a part.
Arthur has disappeared from our public, TV station, and this is my public plea to be like, please bring it back. But yeah, you're right.
We're in a big Arthur phase right now, coincidentally. Those are really good, and they move at this pace that's very easy to ask questions while you're doing it. And they come loaded with books. I mean, there are books for Olive to read at 4 years old, and then there's books she can read when she's a little bit older. I mean, it's an entire library to follow him through your child's life.
So, since we're on the topic of TV here for a second, I was going to ask you about, do you remember the New York Times article that came out maybe a few years ago? It's all about Googlers who were these, technology executives and what have you, who work with technology every day. It's in their lives, but there was sort of a feature on them sending their kids to Waldorf schools, which in general recommend no technology until sort of like middle school. The premise being, we are surrounded by it, and it is intuitive, and they'll learn it. It'll be fine. What are your sort of thoughts on a black and white type approach to technology, all or nothing, and facts that you sort of see if someone does take that without being judgy? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I included Waldorf recommendations in my book. Like, I think it's important that parents know it's out there, and this is one school of thought. It's not what we followed with my daughter. It's really, I mean, from a research standpoint, the research doesn't exist yet. It's you, and I see this already when people debate things that I mention in my book. I mean, I can't say, here are the figures that say this is why this much screen time is right and this much screen time is wrong. And on the flip side, you can't, there's no research yet. It's just too early days, and I mean, my main point is we brought this technology in our lives so quickly. I mean, it arrived. One day it was there, and one day it wasn't. And then suddenly adults, I mean, I just know how much my reading life has changed and my interaction with technology has changed. And we just don't understand all of the effects on our attention span yet and things like that. So it's still early days. So I think there's some merit to being cautious and saying, hey, I don't think those Waldorf children are going to be left behind. I mean, kids will pick up this technology at whatever age they encounter it, as long as you introduce it to them in healthy ways. But yeah, I always kept that at the back of my mind. I think my wife would have wanted the Waldorf thing for us, but we didn't, and I think my daughter's okay. I interviewed a librarian who sends her child to Waldorf school and does let them have technology at home, and she really believes in technology, but she still really values that Waldorf education. So I would never disparage it, and I don't think they're going to be left behind, but at the same time, it's not what I follow. Does that help?
That's right, a very diplomatic answer.
Yeah.
In fact, so I think part of the part of what you say. I actually wrote this quote down. Don't let your children's favorite books end when the book closes. Keep reading and researching until they're ready to choose a new obsession. And part of what you speak to is not just apps, not just shows, but sort of like looking up a video. Like if your kid is, help them build their obsessions, help them build their creativity, and sort of like if your child is really into princesses, for example, right now maybe for you, who are some real life princesses or real historic princesses or whatever. There's so many different ways that you can sort of extend that interest in ways that might work more with what you're interested in, but that also might sort of feed their creativity, right? Evil princesses. I don't know, these types of things that could get them thinking in different ways. And she created these sets of bundles, which are like, if interested in X, also check out all these other things, right? And sort of extend that experience beyond. So speak to us a little bit about that, that idea and how you came up with the bundles and how that works in your own experience with Olive.
Yeah, it was really organic how that happened. I mean, maybe the very first one would be The Monster at the End of the Book, the classic Sesame Street Grover book. Olive loved it as a child. It was, you turn the pages and Grover says, don't turn the pages, don't turn the pages, and you turn the pages, of course, and then you get to the end of the book and Grover is so scared that there's a monster, but at the end it's just Grover, and then he feels very sheepish about that. So I had that book. We read it to her many, many times before she could ever use the iPad. And then when the iPad came into her life, there's an app for that. And so I gave her that app, and she loved the app. She would do that app endlessly. I think she would have played that for 12 hours straight if we would have let her. She just loved it. And so from there, that kind of opened the door to some Sesame Street videos. And then we went back to books and found other books. And I just realized how you could see the wheels turning. I mean, she loved it, and she wanted more and more and more of this. And it wasn't just the app. She wanted more Grover. She wanted more of those stories, and anything I could do to keep that going was really important. And more recently, Frozen came into our lives. It's a Disney princess movie. I wasn't excited to put more Disney stereotype princesses in her mind. But we brought it in, kids were talking about it at her school, and we started watching it, and it's actually a much better movie than I thought it was, and I find myself defending it at parties now to parents who had this attitude I used to have. But so she loved it, and so then I went and I found the fairy tale, the Snow Queen, Hans Christian Andersen's story that it was based on, and I found her a couple different illustrated versions of that, and then we found an audiobook version with music by Tarkowski. We listened to that. And it just kind of turned into this whole experience that lasted. I mean, it's still going on, technically. I mean, we still listen to...
Frozen will never end. That's just like to the record. We're going to be like, I feel like I'm going to be 80 watching that.
I know, but it was so much better to be driving in the car listening to some classical Russian music rather than just the Frozen soundtrack again and again and again and again. And it was good, and it was acceptable for her, and she learned all sorts of new stories and new fairy tales through this adventure.
Yeah, I think that's, I love that. And I think what's interesting is that you, in the book, you often speak to like following Olive's interests. So that's, a lot of data tells us, right, like follow your child's interests. You can get them excited about just about anything as long as it's related to that thing that they're passionate about. And then there's the other side, which is, we get a ton of parents say, I want my child to love math and science. I want my child to love music or whatever it is, any specific thing. And sometimes kids are into one thing or not. I certainly have personal experience. My son is insanely insane about baseball and football and sports. And, I think it's easy to resist that for a while. Then you can indulge it and sort of try to extend it, like you're saying with Frozen. What about the flip side of that, of sort of, inspiring a new interest? Like, how have you been able to accomplish that with Olive, and how do you sort of go about doing that in a way that works for your family, for her, without like trying to push stuff on her,
Yeah, it's funny. Sports is kind of the flip side. This is a good example of sports for us. I mean, Olive didn't. I mean, I'm not a terribly athletic person. I'm in shape, and I value physical education. But yeah, we don't talk about sports a lot in the house, and we knew that she should have a little more physical activity in her life. So about 6 months to a year ago, we put her in soccer to kind of get her, to show her what it's like to be in a team sport, and that we value this as well. And she was kind of excited about it, but it was hard some weekends. She didn't want to go. So then I found an amazing book by Peter Siss called Metalenka Soccer Star. I mentioned it in the book. A fantastic book that really just shows a little girl and celebrates the how people love soccer around the world and how it can change. You can use your imagination to turn the world into a big soccer game. And Olive loved that book, and we spent a lot of time reading that. And then we just carried that over, and I mentioned a few apps we found in there too. I think it really just showed her what soccer is and gave her an idea of how teams work and how even the very basic rules of soccer worked. And it did. She stayed in that whole time, and we put her in for one more session for the soccer too. So I think that was, by following the Born Reading Playbook that way, I was able to at least get her interested enough for another session of soccer. So I was proud of that.
That's right. It's a big, it's a win. I call it a win.
Yeah.
How old was Olive when you published the book, like when the book went to print?
She was, so let me think here. She's 4 now, so the book came out so she was about 3.5 when the book came out. And, but the book happened, it was about a 2-year process, but it moved very quickly, and, right towards, all the way up until the end. So when she was, the very few first months of being 3 years old, I was actually able to give my editor some live data from our experiences and feed that in there. So that was really cool. The publisher was really nice in working with me and just making sure I could include as much of Olive's life in the book as possible.
So the book doesn't end with 4-year-olds or 3.5-year-olds, right? You sort of move us all the way through kindergarten and looking forward beyond that even. And
I'm actually, I write down everything now, in the same way that I was before, and I'm hoping to, at some point, if everything works out, I'd love to include more material about her life, and just because it's her story, and I want her to be in each year of it.
How do you feel like, what are some of the things that you, even in like that sort of like 6-month span, where you haven't been able to add in things, or those notes that you're taking now with Olive, what are some of the things that you're realizing, oh, maybe I would, edit this, or I would change that? What are some of the learnings that you've had subsequently, seeing her approach 4 and sort of live that year now?
The one main thing that I have learned is, and I wish I would have built this into the book a little bit more, is just how quickly this world changes. I mean, if I wish I could have taken advantage more of saying, I wish that there was a way to make it this never-ending story. Like it really, every week I find something new that's important to share, and if there was a way to make this book never end and just to be perpetually updated, I think I would have fought for something like that, or even so now I have a website, and I am inviting parents. I'm going to do kind of a weekly email newsletter where I share the app and the book that I learned this week. But that's the main thing is you could write. You can never close the book on this. The app world changes so quickly. Apple is going to announce something this week that's probably going to change things that I would talk about in this book dramatically. We don't know, but we'll see. It's going to change so quickly. So that's one main thing. It's just I wish there was a way to keep it more of a never-ending story, and I'm working on that. The other thing is crafts. I mentioned crafts a little bit in that book, but now that Olive's 4, she loves it. She was just last night cutting out little felt characters that she was making out of felt and glue, and as that part of her life is really, really growing so quickly, I wish I would have given more crafts for parents, and so I'm putting a post up later this week about that on the site. just places to find crafts related to your favorite books. Yeah, I really wish I would have mentioned crafts more, because it's any book that your child loves. If you go online, if it's published by a major publisher, that author probably has a website, and on that website there are probably activities you can do with your child around that book. And I'm putting up a few this week. Olive's really into Fancy Nancy and Nate the Great and a few people like that, and I found some great crafts that she can do. It's as simple as printing something off the internet and then cutting it out or tracing the pattern. It's really great stuff, and it's all right there for me.
Yeah, and as they get older, I mean, that's very much related to, most kids learn to write before they're reading, right? Like they're learning, right? And so like the building all those fine motor skills is really important, and I think you'll get them to do it much more easily if they're doing it with relation to something that they love, right? So,
yeah, it's so fun to do it, and I'm not a very crafty person myself, so it's been an education for me as well.
Yeah. And I guess we can wrap this up with a couple, just two last questions. First is, there's, despite your book and the new recommendations, reading to kids from birth, there's quite a bit of research that's come out recently just to tell us that once kids hit the age of like 6, that we tend to be more committed to reading to our kids in early years. Even then, parents aren't reading to their kids at bedtime as much as we used to, which is pretty much when majority of people are reading aloud if their child. We're just not reading as much as we're reading more, maybe in different places, like online in different ways, but we're not reading literature as much as a country and as a society. And what are your thoughts about, what we have in store, like that world that Olive's kind of stepping into now? You are trying to instill such a love for reading in her and sort of build her up as a reader from a young age. What do you think? Do you think that we're going to kind of like head in the right direction? Do you think there are enough people sort of listening to the drumbeat that's out there by now from experts like yourself?
I am concerned. I really feel we are at a crossroads, and I feel like the decision, the future of reading is in our children's hands, but it's up to us to show them why it still matters in this world with lots of bells and whistles and other devices that will show you other ways to have those experiences. I really, when I talk to parents, especially someone like you, you have so many great kids books behind you, and it was important to you. You wanted to read. Reading was important to me. I mean, there was never any question in my life that, I'm not going to read to my daughter. I knew I was going to read to my daughter, but I didn't realize until I had written this book, like how important it was for my parents to have read to me, and I wouldn't be a reader unless my parents had read to me. And it's a set of motions that you have to learn, and you have to model it over and over and over and over for many, many years to produce someone that loves books as much as I do. It's not inborn in me. You have to learn it, and you learn it from your parents and your caregivers. And so I see just around me and my own habits, our reading is changing too, and I think it's a very dangerous time. I think we could accidentally stop modeling the behaviors that our kids need without even thinking about it. And I think 10 years down the road, when we're looking at the way we adapted to these devices so quickly, I think we're going to say, maybe we did this wrong, or maybe we did this right, but we can't sort it out yet. And until we do have the data to sort it out and say these are the best ways to use devices and these are the best behaviors to teach your kids, I just think it's really important to err on the side of caution, to model reading as much as you can, and just push these print books as much as you can, and make sure that it's still a part of our life, our conversation, and the culture that our kids grow up in.
That, in fact, addresses, I think, what would have been my sort of final question, which is around sort of parting advice. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the parting advice is to model reading, to be a reader yourself, and to be sure to bring in, to think about how you're using digital media and be more intentional about it. And then also to make sure that you're also including print and doing it every day and seeing the long game is right, and not thinking of it, it's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon, and making sure you're doing it every day, long term.
Yeah, I think that's a very elegant way of summarizing it. I mean, to be even more specific, I would say, if possible, read 15 minutes to a half an hour every day with your kid. It will not make your life easier. It makes it a lot harder. My wife and I are both working parents. We struggle to hit that quota every day. I mean, even though I wrote a book about this, we struggle to hit that every day. And then try to limit the screen time. Don't keep it out of your child's life, but limit it. I would, and neither of those things are going to make your life easier.
You gave some great tips in here. I would say also you do give also in the book some great tips for like ways of limiting that, to avoiding tantrums. When they're not 4, they start to get a little more reasonable. When they're but like pre-4, there's just like not a lot of reason happening. So like having some set routines, and you give some good guidance, I think, around that here as well.
Yeah, I think routines are the most important thing for both of those. If your child knows that reading a print book is part of their routine and using the device is part of their routine, they will adapt to that. And it's just really important, I think, to just be as direct and mindful of this as possible right now, because we really are at a crossroads. There is a chance these kids have no reason to read a print book the rest of their lives once you stop reading a print book to them. And maybe that's okay. Maybe they will just read digital books. My reading is mostly digital books now, but I just don't want them. It would be so easy to lose it. I go back to Mad Men a couple times in the book, this show about showing how silly people were in the 1950s about things like smoking or about TV use and things like that, and we laugh at it now, but there is going to be a show 50 years from now laughing at the way we use technology, and maybe they will say, oh gosh, I can't believe they put those cell phones so close to their heads. Or maybe they'll say, oh my God, I can't believe they put an iPad in the crib with that baby. I mean, they are going to be laughing at some of our decisions because they will have the scientific data to say, hey, this is the right way or the wrong way to do it. And just to be we should be mindful of that we don't know yet. And so I just don't want to cut it out of our kids' lives yet, and just be thoughtful about it.
Yeah, that's great advice, and thank you so much. And please, if you haven't already, pick up a copy, digital or print, Born Reading, and the author is Jason Boog. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. So great to see you.
Likewise.